Okay, Push, we're going to be looking at how some African nations are going to get their independence and what that means for them in that moment and what that means for them in the future. Remember that we've talked a lot about this. Why is independence sometimes the easy part of a country's history? And the hard part comes after gaining independence. We know that none of these countries wanted to be ruled by outside forces. That is abundantly clear. And many of them had a really tough road to fight for their independence. But since then, we've seen some countries struggle more than others as far as putting the country together again. So we're going to try to break that down and think of some examples while we go through this where this has been true. Think about it in sub-Saharan Africa. Think about it other times in world history. So it's really important that you understand you need to be able to do this reading. Okay, guys, that's going to fill in a lot of the storyline gaps here. I'm just hitting the basics, but this is in the book from page 662 to 669. So make sure you open up that book, go to 662, follow along with me here as I walk you through. Okay, here is what I'm going to ask you to do when we're done. We've already talked quite a bit about Nigeria. Remember, you guys were the North, the East, and the West. We talked about Biafra and the Civil War and how that led to a lot of instability and the rise of Boko Haram today. So we're going to look now at 4 more nations. And I'm going to ask you, when this is done, for you to rank which one you think is the most successful to the least successful. Again, 662 to 669, folks, is where you're going to find all this, okay? So these are the 4 countries we're going to focus on: Ghana, Kenya, Algeria, and Congo. Pause me right now if you do not have your study guide in front of you. I'm not kidding. Pause me, take it out, get that study guide, because on the very first page, we're going to go through several terms and names. And these are not necessarily easy to pronounce or spell, so I want you to have that so you can fill it in as you go. Okay? I better see you pausing me. So let's get into it. Okay, we're going to start off with Ghana. Where is Ghana? Ghana? See them right there. I circled them for you. They are the first nation south of the Sahara Desert to win independence in 1957. And so you can see this is a pretty big step. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some of the people that are involved in that. Ghana is a good example of a country that had a strong start, but has definitely struggled a bit. So think about why that's happened. So Kwame Nkrumah, you see him on your study guide? He's the one that organized the movement for independence from Britain and really pushed to and led to Ghanaian independence. So Ghana used to be called Gold Coast, and when they got their independence, they renamed themselves to Ghana to kind of link the past and the present. Okay, so this is 1957, and what Kwame Nkrumah thought was the best thing to do would be to push for socialism and nationalize and bring under government control a lot of the businesses. So the government spent a lot of money on this huge dam here, and that it basically created a new lake. But the trouble is that left a lot of debt. Okay, so then we started to see Kwame Nkrumah get nailed with some corruption charges. And in 1966, he was overthrown by the first of several military coups in Ghana. So it's going to be one of those things where we're going to see coup d'etats taking over, different leaders, different coup d'etats, and that just makes it really hard to put things together and move forward. So in 1981, we saw another coup led by this guy, Jerry Rawlings, and he definitely tried to strengthen the economy, which is really based in cocoa and gold. He also brought some more democracy back to Ghana and some more political stability. So I would say that's definitely a step forward. Won a free election in 1982 and lost an election in 2001 and did step aside. So that kind of showed then that things were changing a little bit and moving more towards a democratic government. Okay, our next stop here is Kenya. Now, we have talked about Kenya in class a bit as a very recent example of a country that's struggling with some of the disarray here in Somalia and the attacks from al-Shabaab. We're going to rewind it back here and show you how Kenya got their independence. Okay, so Jomo Kenyatta. Boy, do I wish all the names were this easy. You see the word Kenya hiding in there? Boom, there it is. He is the one who really pushed for independence from the British. Okay, he was the leader of a particular ethnic group called the Kikuyu, and he used non-violent tactics to get independence from the British. As the British responded with violence, then they put Jomo Kenyatta in jail. Now, even in jail, he wasn't really stopped. The British weren't able to stop the movement, I should say. So the movement kind of kept going, and in 1963, he became really a national hero because he was thrown in prison. And he became the first leader of an independent Ghana. Okay, so that's great, right? Right? Sounds good to me. Under his rule, Kenya enjoyed 15 years of political stability and economic advances. But here we go. As president, he started cracking down on anybody who spoke out against him. And he was jailing opponents. And he was outlawing opposition parties. And he's not letting the elections be free and fair. So that's really what we're going to see in Kenya. And this has led to a lot of unrest. Finally, in 2002, they had their first fair election that hadn't been rigged or tampered with, and it removed the ruling party from office. But there's definitely still some struggles, and I would say that the growth of al-Shabaab in neighboring Somalia, the Somali refugee crisis that is affecting Kenya, all of those things are putting pressure on the government in Kenya. Okay, let's move to north of the Sahara. We're going to check out Algeria. They're really the only one in here that's north of the Sahara Desert. We're going to spend a lot more time on this region in our next unit, but let's take a look at what's going on there. And it is a hard-fought road to independence, you guys. The French did not want to give this area up, and there's a reason for that. Resource. Oil and natural gas really played a lot of a factor in that, and France does not want to give up this colony. It's just making a lot of money for them. Also, remember, in 1954, the French lost their colony in Vietnam and French Indochina, so they're even more determined to hang on. So they brutally repress the people here that are asking for independence, and it takes a hard fight, and finally in 1962, Algeria got its freedom. Okay? But then we see this pattern of coup d'etats, you guys. We see it come, leaders overthrowing other leaders, military being in charge. We know that when the military is in charge, that's not usually a good sign. So in the 1960s and 70s, Algeria nationalized their foreign firms and created a command economy based on oil and gas exports. So they were very dependent on that. Now, since the 1980s, they've returned to a more market economy, not the government necessarily having as much of a say. But in 1992, when the government finally allowed some free elections, we had an Islamist party that got the most votes. So this was a party that really wanted to push the government to be based on the teachings of Islam. And the military rejected the election results. So that led to 7 years of civil war between the Islamists and the military, and 100,000 Algerians dead. So since 1999, the government's largely stopped the fighting, but the country definitely remains tense. Okay, and what we're going to see in our next unit is the Arab Spring revolts that began in 2011 are going to push for more reforms, more democracy, better access to jobs, more equity. So there's a history of that, of people trying to gain more rights here in Algeria, but oil and gas can make things very complicated. They did in Nigeria, and they will also here in Algeria. Okay, the last one we're going to look at here is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Don't be fooled by that name, you guys. This is not a democratic republic. And unfortunately, our country's history has a pretty not very fun to look at part of this past. So we're going to see that too. It's going to be a little, we need to look at this critically. So let's break this down. The Cold War was really a big factor, and the United States is going to play a role in that. So 1960, the Belgians basically allowed them to get independence very quickly, like arguably too quickly. Your book talks about how they were not ready for a smooth transition from a Belgian colony to a free and independent nation. Why? We know the Belgians had been mistreating the Congolese people for some time, but the fact that it's going to be so quick creates some issues. So let's explain that. So one thing that we know that the Belgians did, and a lot of European nations did this, is sort of make the Congolese depend upon them, right? Not allowing people to have freedoms, not allowing people to have their rights. And so one of those was education. So in 1960, when Congo gets its independence, in the entire country, let's take a look at this. Look at how large this country is, okay? Very densely populated. In the entire country, there were 16 people with a college degree. Congolese people, 16. Not because they didn't want them, because the Belgians wouldn't let them. Okay, so now what's the issue? Well, now the Belgians are just out. They're leaving. And you need people that have good education. They know how the ins and outs of politics. They understand how branches work and checks and balances and all this stuff and have experience. And you just don't have as many. So it's going to be a struggle to kind of put the country together. They're going to do the best they can. But what we're going to see here is we have two kind of leaders emerge. We've got Patrice Lumumba, and Patrice Lumumba was the one who was the first prime minister. And Now, he was under a lot of attack from some rebels who didn't think he should be the leader. And he did appeal to the Soviets to help fight the rebels because he was more of a socialist kind of leftist leader. He wanted to do more nationalizing things and bringing them under government control. Now, because it was, the 1960s, and because this is the Cold War, the United States saw his appeal and his begging the Soviet Union for help as a threat. So Patrice Lumumba was overthrown, was captured in Leopoldville, which is renamed Kinshasa, and the United States helped sponsor a leader. That name was Joseph Mobutu. Now here's the nasty part, you guys. Joseph Mobutu is going to be a brutal military dictator, and he will be in power from 1965 all the way until 1997. So he had Lumumba executed. Okay, so the United States plays a role in this, in backing up this harsh, corrupt dictator. That's a tough pill to swallow, but I think we need to recognize that, and it was in the name of the Cold War. So that's something that you can see the Cold War playing out in some of these African nations. So civil war, even after 1997, raged for years. Local military forces are fighting over Congo's wealth. There's a tremendous amount of resources there. 2006, you can see Joseph Kabila is elected, and those were the first truly free elections in 41 years. So he has done his best to try to pick up the pieces and move on, but Congo really has struggled. And the Cold War plays a big role, as does our country, and we need to take a look at that. It's a really, really good book if you guys are readers. It's a Georgia family of missionaries that moved to Congo in 1959, right before all this started. And the story is told through their 4 daughters' point of view. Each chapter is a different daughter. It's really good. It makes you think. So it's called the Poisonwood Bible. Highly recommended if you're interested in this topic and you like to read. Okay, so I guess the bottom line we need to look at this is, how do a lot of African nations today move forward despite the difficulties of the past? So we've looked at Nigeria, we've looked at Somalia, South Africa, Rwanda, Ghana, Kenya, Algeria, Congo. There's good, but there's also some mistrust and some suspicion and years of civil war. How do you move on from that, guys? And before we just say, oh, well, that's their fault, right? Don't have a civil war. We should remind ourselves that our own country went through a civil war and had to put our country back together. And it was hard and it's difficult. And, you could argue we're still dealing with the legacy of that. And it's been 150 years. So for most of these countries, it's only been 50 years at the most. Some of these countries, it's even been less than that, 10 or 15. So think about that. Now I want you to think about, which country do you think had the better path to independence, and which one would you say struggled the most? We're going to rank those. We're going to talk about them in class, so think about that. All right, make sure you've read 662 to 669, you got that study guide, and you're ready to go. I'll see you on the other side.